If my letter makes no appeal to your heart, on the 11th day of this month, I shall proceed with such co-workers of the ashram as I can take, to disregard the provisions of the salt laws. I regard this tax to be the most iniquitous of all the poor man's standpoint. As the independence movement is essentially for the poorest in the land, the beginning will be made with this evil. Letter from Gandhi to the Viceroy of India, March 2nd, 1930. Mohandas K. Gandhi was a man whose non-violent acts led India to independence. The British restricted everything, from the crops to the cloth. They chose what an Indian should pay on taxes and what he should grow in his crops. The most, though, even though as irrelevant it was to the British, held a very vital role in the heart of India. Salt was an enormous monopoly that the British held in India. They mined it, sold it, and held a tax on it. And if you did any of that yourself, it was illicit and you would be sent to prison. Salt was important in an Indian's diet because they needed twice as much salt to stay active.
Salt is something that everybody needs, from the poor to the rich. Everybody needs salt, and it used to be freely available because India has 4,000 miles of sea coast, and they could easily make their own salt from seawater. But the British decided they were going to manufacture salt in England, package it there and bring it and sell it to the Indian people at about 20 times the price that they would, pay for their own salt made at home. And that was an injustice. And the fact that he chose salt as a way of defying was a masterstroke, because he was able to get everybody involved, from the poorest to the richest, everybody involved in the struggle, because everybody needed salt.
On March 2nd, 1930, Gandhi sent a letter to the current Viceroy of India, Lord Irwin, stating that if the salt tax was not lowered, among other things, then he would launch a Satyagraha, which is a philosophy and practice of non-violent resistance developed by Gandhi. This Satyagraha would inspire many Indians and others around the world. On March 12, 1930, he led approximately 78 men with him, starting the long 240-mile walk to Dandi from Sabarmati, a 23-day walk. As he walked, many joined in, wanting to help the cause to obtain a free India. He arrived to Dandi on the night of April 5, 1930, telling all that he would commence his disobedience in the morning. He said, "God willing, I expect my company to commence actual civil disobedience at 6:30 tomorrow morning. 6th April has been to us, since its culmination in the Jallianwala Massacre, a day for penance and purification. We therefore commence it with prayer and fasting." The Jallianwala Massacre was in the center of the Indian city Amritsar, when approximately 2,500 Indians gathered in the center of the city to hold a meeting about civil disobedience, which was illegal. General Reginald Dyer ordered his 50 troops to commence firing upon the Indians, leaving 379 dead, with over 2,000 wounded. This was considered a consequence in how the British sought after a strong militarized control. This consequence and 60,000 imprisoned were hard on Gandhi. The nonviolent principle can remain, even if the other party uses violence. This philosophy can be traced back to Jesus of Nazareth.
That was a very significant day in Indian history when more than 300 people were killed and more than 2,000 people were severely injured by the British. It was a day that signified the brutality of the British administration, and he wanted the people to remember that day with their own non-violent struggle.
At 6:30 in the morning, on the 6th of April 1930, Gandhi briskly walked to the coast of the Indian Sea, bent down, and picked up illegal salt. After a speech on independence by Gandhi, people ran to the sea and started making their own salt. A success of his diplomacy was that Gandhi inspired many Indians on that day. Gandhi used tools to be able to gain support by inspiring many Indians. The best tools that he could use, though, were through non-cooperation, disobedience, and pacifism.
Well, each is so contrary to what the political order expects. The political order works well, achieving its ends when people cooperate and obey, and if they don't do that, then the expectation of the government or the powers to be is that there is violence or some kind of overt resistance.
The Salt March was most definitely a success, but with the consequences of defying the British superpower. At the end of the Salt episode, more than 60,000 Indians were imprisoned, with several beaten and killed by the British. Though consequences loomed over the Salt March, this showed the Indian people that this was a success with how they could defy the unjust British rule.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed.
A famous march of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was the March of Selma, which took place because a white Boston minister was killed by several white men because the white minister supported change to end discrimination. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was inspired by Gandhi and his teachings. Martin Luther King Jr. can be traced through history also because of his diplomatic successes, through what he learned through the teachings of Mohandas K. Gandhi and Jesus, and how they worked quite well.
When Dr. King and Gandhi combined non-obedience and pacifism, it was it was revolutionary in terms of causing the political order to not understand how do you deal with that, particularly when all the tools that they had in their toolbox were the use of violence in order to get people to obey. And so the surprise element, if you will, the shocking element to those that Gandhi confronted was that they would have dealt a whole lot better with violent disobedience than pacifistic disobedience.
Gandhi made a mark on the world, even though he just wanted change in India. Some of us were changed by his teachings, and some don't even know who Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi is. But our world today has vastly been changed by him and his diplomatic success in India. Those 60,000 people arrested came at a consequence. Many believe that if he was not here, our world would have been changed for the worst. Years after Gandhi's assassination, on January 30th, 1948, Martin Luther King Jr. and others showed non-violent resistance in the 60s. Recently, the people of Egypt overthrew their dictator, Hosni Mubarak, with non-violence.
I think his life was an adequate message. He has mentioned this in his own writings. He said, "My life is my message." And I think his life, the way he led it and the things that he achieved is a message for mankind. And the fact that we are still interested in him and his philosophy 60 years after his death is an indication that it was a very vibrant philosophy.
The accomplishments of the Salt March were sadly marked with many deaths, many beaten with Gandhi's own life taken. Yet India is now free and autonomous to shape their own destiny because of Mahatma Gandhi. Be the change you want to see in the world.